bounce. Let me hear your bar. Let me see you bite. Let me see your scar. You know what we about. Come see us in the yard. This is war. Golden Ripper hard. Dogs in the house. 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 Dogs in the house.
Hello and welcome to All We Hear is Purple, the third or fourth most mediocre Husky football podcast on the internet. I am Andrew Berg, and joining me on this wind-addled evening is Raymond Lucas Jr. Ray, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Luckily, not dealing with the crazy weather,
Yeah,
being in San Diego. But yeah, it's it's funny to say I'm doing good while everyone's dealing with a bunch of rain. But yeah,
yeah, we're the skeleton crew today. Everybody else is unavailable due to power outages and internet outages, but the two of us who don't actually currently live in Seattle are still able to go. So we'll do our best to talk about the Huskies. So let's do that. The Huskies are coming off a win over UCLA, 31-19, probably a slightly easier win than we probably expected, at least going by our aggregate predictions on UW Dog Pound. Huskies are now 6-0 at home and 0-5 away. Their schedule accounts for some of this difference. You know, the Huskies do have a slightly easier home schedule than road schedule so far this year. Uh, but they still beat, teams like USC and Michigan. UCLA was coming in on a three-game winning streak before this one. Those teams are probably better than Washington State and Rutgers, at least debatably, which were losses away from home. So, what do you think accounts for such a huge difference between home and road form for this team?
yeah. I mean, they say there's no place like home for a reason, and I think that is especially the case when you play at a place like Husky Stadium. I think we're so used to what Husky Stadium brings on like Saturdays when there's a big game that I think we kind of take it for granted. But it was on display a lot. Like the USC game, the Michigan game, it really you wouldn't guess that the team didn't have college football playoff expectations surrounding them or anything like that. Like it felt like big time games, even though the team was playing a notch below what we've seen the last couple of seasons, and that's a really big deal. And it just shows how great of a home field advantage there is, and I think it's also a lot easier when you're not traveling to the East Coast. Like you're everything is local. Like you're getting up, you're traveling to the stadium, you're doing your dog walk. Like everything is a lot more usual compared to playing an Apple Cup that's still kind of local but different because now you're going to Lumen Field or going all the way to Rutgers or going all the way to Penn State and all of these like crazy, crazy road trips. So yeah, it definitely was unique, very unique this season.
Yeah, it has been bizarre, and some of it might be we have like such a young offensive line, even or young and inexperienced and haven't played together and also inconsistent. And has clearly been a problem in some of these road losses, like the Iowa game, and then the Penn State game. Obviously, they're just overwhelmed. So maybe that had something to do with it. Like even just losing a little bit of an edge on the offensive line is too much for the offense to bear. But either way, at least they're showing that they can beat pretty good teams at home. One of the things that we did learn in this game, we got a little bit more clarity on the quarterback situation. It looks like Damon Williams has more or less taken over. Jed Fish hasn't said that officially. He wants Oregon to still have to prepare for two quarterbacks going into the rivalry game next week. But, Williams came in after we saw three interceptions by Will Rogers. One was called back due to a penalty, but Rogers, who's been really good all year at taking care of the ball, kind of playing safe, making the smart play, made some not very smart, not very careful passes in this game. What do you think? Was this the right move at the right time? And do you think Williams is the guy who gives us the best chance to win going forward in the Oregon game and a bowl game?
I think it's t tough as far as when it comes to best case to or best shot at winning because I mean it's in theory yes because he can use his legs and he can get out of the pocket and he can make plays and I think as far as the bowl game goes definitely but this up or not upcoming but after we enjoy the bye week and then that game against Oregon. That's really tough for a young quarterback to go into that environment and play well. That's something that I'm really interested and seeing is how he handles like that type of pressure, assuming that he's going to be the starting quarterback, opposed to Will Rogers, who has a lot of SEC experience. He's played in a lot of these massive stadiums, loud stadiums where, yeah, I mean, I guess Oregon's not really massive, but it's very loud, and it's you're used to that. But at the same time, if Oregon is containing the pass game and if they're breaking down the pocket and getting to Will Rogers, then there's not really much that he can do. He doesn't have the athleticism to get loose and make plays with his legs. So it's it's an interesting one. I say go with Damon Williams because this is a game where you want energy, you want a fast start, you don't want your quarterback to start getting sacked over and over, and that can take a big hit on the offensive confidence. And then circling back to the first part of your question, I think it's been interesting because there's been times where it's been really frustrating when Jed Fish has chosen to turn to Damon Williams. And against the UCLA game, it kind of felt like everything that had happened in the past led up to that moment. And like maybe that was him saying, okay, eventually Damon Williams is probably going to be the guy. And as far as this season goes, and so we're going to get him these opportunities to go in and get experience, even if it stifles the offense, because he's our quarterback of the future. So it's interesting how all of that has built up to him potentially starting against the number one team in the nation the weekend after this upcoming one.
Yeah, it's interesting kind of watching the reactions to both Rodgers and Williams over the last few weeks, or really over the whole season. I think both of them have kind of got more vitriol than they probably have earned from certain groups. Obviously, there's always going to be people who are really hard on the quarterback after a loss. I think Rodgers has been quite good, better than a little bit better than I expected him to be. Not great, but probably in the top half of Big Ten quarterbacks this year. If you watch some of the other games, like a lot of these guys who were supposed to be pretty good, like Billy Edwards at Maryland, Akman Kaliakmanis at Rutgers, super inconsistent. And I think I would probably take Rodgers over a lot of those players. And he's dealt with this piecemeal offensive line all year. And some of the negative plays have come from just overwhelming pressure as the schedule's gotten more difficult. Like you said, I don't think that's really going to change against Oregon. They have a very good defensive line. Uh, I'm kind of terrified of what Mateo Uliangalele against whoever we're starting at left tackle is going to look like. Uh, but that may be an argument for having somebody more mobile. But more than that, like we've kind of accomplished our objective for the year. Like we wanted to get bowl eligible. Williams helped us to do that. Um, this wasn't a year when we were going to win the Big Ten. This is definitively a rebuilding year, and getting to a bowl game is a positive. Would have been nice to win 7 or 8 games, and we still could win 7 games. We still could win 8 games in a bowl game, but uh, I think asking for more than that this year was kind of nuts anyway. Um, and getting Williams a little bit more experience following that is probably a positive. So before we move off of the UCLA game, this was kind of unique both for the uniforms, these all black uniforms with the matte black helmets and the chrome face masks, but also the World of Warcraft tie-in. What's your final verdict on both the uniforms and unrelatedly the Warcraft tie-in to the game?
Yeah, so as someone who hasn't played, I was gonna say a ton of World of Warcraft, but I've actually played like never played it at all. So someone who hasn't ever like even uh kind of delved into that realm, which is a weird way to say it considering the game.
It
But
is about realms. Yeah, there you go.
yeah, I don't know what I really expected, but I didn't mind it. I mean, it was pretty minor. Like it wasn't like, oh, like this product placement where we're gonna change our logo on the helmet or like put some weird text on jerseys or anything like that. Like it was pretty much, I think, as you would expect it to go when you see two basically brands, two companies essentially partnering. And so yeah, I didn't mind that at all. As far as the jerseys go, really like them. I hope that moving forward, all of those Husky royalty uniforms, they kind of get mixed and matched a little bit if the combination looks good. And it doesn't just become a thing of like, oh, we wore these this one season and then we're not going to see them again. Because even though the purple uniforms caused us a lot of stress against Arizona State last year, I actually really liked the look. It's not one that you would want to see every Saturday, but it doesn't hurt to have nice alternates. And so, yeah, World of Warcraft, I didn't mind the uniforms. I loved them.
Yeah, uniforms. I'm often skeptical of the solid colored uniforms. I think it looks a little gimmicky sometimes. I thought these were really good. I like that they still incorporated a lot of the purple, because my biggest complaint about all black uniforms is often the Spinal Tap criticism of how much more black could this be? The answer is none, none more black. And these actually had Husky colors in addition to the black, which was cool. And the helmets looked very, very distinctive and different. I also love how black and purple look together. Like when the Ravens do primary black with purple trim for their alternate uniforms, I always think that looks really cool too. Northwestern has done that in the past, and it's looked really good. I think back of like Darnell Autry when Northwestern went to the Rose Bowl that one year. They looked really cool. So yeah, I would gladly see these uniforms, welcome them back into the rotation next year for a game or two. But I'm glad that we kind of have like a home uniform, and then we work off of that instead of having 100 different uniforms and there's not like a primary one. The Warcraft thing, yeah, I'm kind of with you. If they got some money out of that, it was very unobtrusive. Like you could have gone the whole game without noticing it if you weren't looking for it. Um, and if they got paid for it, that's great. My only reaction to it was they showed them on the sidelines, those like characters in the costumes at one point, and my 5-year-old daughter was just like, her dress is cool. About somebody dressed like an elf or something. So I guess it did land at least with that demographic. So that's good. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back for part two to talk a little bit of Oregon coming up after the bye, a little bit of some recruiting updates that have been coming in. So exciting stuff there. Um, so stick with us and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's talk a little bit about coming up after this bye week, the Oregon game. Oregon, obviously number one in the country, undefeated. Last year, they had a chance to spoil our undefeated run to the college football playoffs and didn't do it. We won by 3 points, as we did every time Kalen DeBoer played Oregon. They have Dylan Gabriel. He's been everything they asked for at quarterback, just rock solid, making plays, kind of doing a little bit of the Bo Nix thing of a lot of stuff behind the line of scrimmage and short throws, but super efficient and making good decisions. Jordan James has been a really, really good running back for them. So, right, looking ahead to this game, what do the Huskies need to look out for? Is this like Oregon just a question of whether they're patient enough to grind it out on the ground like teams like Penn State and Iowa did against us?
Yeah, this is an interesting game. Like it's you could see Oregon running away with it, especially being at home, but I think you could also see some inflated confidence from the Ducks and the Huskies feasting off of that. Like I think going into this game, the talk around Eugene is probably going to be, "Oh, this is their Super Bowl, this is their whatever." But when you look at the recent history of the rivalry, it would suggest otherwise. I think it's Oregon that's going to be uh, a little bit more motivated given what's happened in recent years as opposed to a Washington team that had to replace a whole lot of players. And so, as far as what to look out for, like I said, I think they're going to be thinking like this is the Huskies Super Bowl, and Oregon had a similar mindset when they played a team like Colorado when they thumped the Buffaloes, and they also had it when they played Oregon State a couple years back, and Oregon State came back and won. And so I say all of that to say the Huskies need to look out for the trick play. They need to look out for the big shots downfield because I think Oregon, their confidence really is what fuels a lot of these lopsided wins, but it also can get them into trouble and it gets Dan Lanning making aggressive decisions at times. And I'm sure there's going to be fake punts, there's going to be onside kicks, there's going to be trick plays because I mean, he wants nothing more than to blow out the Huskies, if you ask me. So, yeah, it's attention to detail, hyper awareness as far as anything that might look a little off, and we're gonna see how this one goes. It'll definitely be interesting.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's kind of, if I was an Oregon fan, I would kind of be looking at it like, please don't get too cute. Like, please don't make this more difficult than it has to be, because just lining up their offensive line against our defensive line and vice versa, they should be able to just kind of play an old school simple football game and like keep the chains moving and win the game that way. And if Lanning runs a lot of trick plays, fake field goals or fake punts or whatever, uh, that seems like the kind of thing that could, it might work brilliantly. It might get them in more trouble, and they might not need it in this game. But Oregon, you kind of alluded to this. They're not invincible. They haven't lost, but they're also, we just saw them have a really tough game against Wisconsin where the Badgers could have won it on their final drive, but were not able to drive the field. Oregon is not like, they're clearly number one in the rankings because they're undefeated. They beat Ohio State at home, but they're not number one in most of the advanced stat ratings. They're actually kind of like, I think in the net EPA, they're number 9 in the country, and SP plus they're fifth or sixth. So they're haven't kind of distanced themselves from the rest of the competition. So if there is kind of a weakness to this team or a game plan that the Huskies can employ to take advantage of, what some other teams like Boise did to keep it really close to the end, what Wisconsin did to keep it close to the end. What do you think that is? Like, what do you think it is the Huskies can leverage to at least keep the game close in that way?
I think it's speeding up Dylan Gabriel and getting him to rush some decisions. I don't have the number in front of me, but I know that he's thrown a handful of red zone interceptions, and to me, that says that when you're forcing him to make a quick decision, and there's not a receiver that's running wide open down the field, then you're leaving the opportunity for him to throw interceptions. It worked against Bo Nix. It's worked against him at times this season because, like you mentioned, he's playing very similar to how Nix was playing last season, where it's like they make the game really easy for the quarterback, and that's not like slight of what Gabriel can do. It's just how they like to run their offense, and because of that, if you can get them off schedule, if you can get Gabriel to have to make like a really fast decision. Like he's not able to just look at the easy check down. He has to hold the ball a little longer and then maybe force a pass. I mean, we know the Huskies' pass defense is really good, and I think that's probably the thing that gives me the most confidence if I was looking at any unit in this group is UW defending the pass. Now, that's not easy because they have some extremely fast wide receivers. They have weapons all over the field, but I think if you just have to speed Dylan Gabriel up, and that's a lot easier said than done with their offensive line. And on the other side of the ball, it's it's tough, but you just have to get them in a shootout because I don't know if the Huskies will be able to make this game ugly, and I don't know if it's really a game that they can win if they make it ugly because if you're starting a young quarterback, you don't necessarily know how many points he's going to be able to go get you. And if you're starting Will Rogers, whose offensive line isn't going to give him a lot of time to throw, you don't really know how many points he's going to get you. So offense needs to show up and be ready, and this needs to be a shootout.
Yeah, hopefully. We haven't done a lot of shooting out offensively, but like you said, things are going to look a little bit different with Williams at quarterback, and I think the coaching staff is going to know this isn't going to be like a game that you manage. It's a game where you pull out the stops and go for it on fourth down and take some deep shots and empty out the playbook and see if there's something you can do to get Oregon off balance early. Because I think you're right that if there's a chance to disrupt them, it's probably our pass rush. Like we saw Russell Davis do it last week. We've seen Lance Holtz call at times. We've seen, kind of a right. Zach Durfee's had big games here and there. Like this deep rotation of edge rushers. And if they could kind of get going and make things uncomfortable for Gabriel, that has been a bit of a problem for him. One other thing leading up to this game, I've watched a couple interviews with Gabriel and seen clips of him. And this is probably because I just watched the Netflix series on them, but he kind of reminds me of Lyle Menendez. I'm not saying that he deserves to be in prison for the rest of his life, but he does play for Oregon, so there are probably worse things that could happen to him. Um,
Yeah.
so that you heard it here first. Dylan Gabriel is Lyle Menendez. That leave it at that. There are a couple other things we just wanted to touch on quickly from the recruiting trail over the weekend. We were going to have Luke with us, but Luke Kemper, one of our recruiting writers, but he has been afflicted by the bomb cyclone. So we're going to do our best to cover the recruiting news. There were two commitments over the weekend. There was 2026 in-state wide receiver Terrence Sarian and 2025, kind of a surprise late commitment, running back Quade Carr, who had been committed to San Diego State down in your neck of the woods. Any takeaways from either of these commitments, Ray? Anything that kind of jumped out at you about Huskies pursuing these guys and then also getting them to commit at this point?
Yeah, I think the big thing to me is the timing. It's while it's easy to look at like the like overall, it's easy to say, man, like I wish the season would have gone differently. I don't know if there's a lot of people on the outside looking in that are like, oh man, Washington was really disappointing. And I think that's translating with recruits because Washington becomes bowl eligible and they're like, wow, look at what Coach Fish was able to do despite losing so many players. And it was I sent in a tweet or a post on X, whatever you want to call it, on Slack, where someone was saying like, "What an awesome job by Jed Fish to get this program bowl eligible." And the post came from a non-Washington supporter, and so to me that says, okay, let's take a deep breath and realize that there's some trajectory. It's things are going a little bit better than we thought, even if we wished that they were better.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like we're going from Michael Penix and Roma Dunze in 50-point games to, what we watched against Iowa and Indiana, and it's kind of painful for fans who watch every play. But like, if you have a little bit of distance from it, yes, naturally there's going to be a big difference in the outcomes, and the fact that the team rebuilt itself so quickly and Jed Fish rebuilt itself so quickly. This isn't a failure of a season. It's not like an A+ outcome, but it's not like they face planted either. And there are a lot of things that are set up well for the future. And adding players like this, like Sarian is one of the more uh, highly touted recruits in the state for 2026. So kind of showing more focus on in-state recruiting is positive. There've been a lot of good there's been a lot of good noise around a lot of the top in-state recruits, and the more of those they can keep around, the better, because you're always going to have an inroads with the local players, and you're not going to get every one of them, but at least building good relationships with their programs is a positive. And then Carr is, it seems like they kind of like the Thunder and Lightning running back duos. Huskies haven't really done that in, you know, 20 plus years where they kind of have a real running back pair. It's always been kind of one guy who's the main running back, unless nobody really earned the spot. And then there was more of a job share. I think of like the Dwayne Washington year, there were more shared carries, but it wasn't as deep of a running back room. Um, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they deploy that with like a bigger back and more of a speedster, and if we see using them at different points in games and so on, because we haven't really had that with this year because Jonah Coleman's been the guy. Also, looking ahead, there's three recruits to keep an eye on. There's two receivers, Andrew Marsh and Donovan Olugbode, who were both on campus for the game. Marsh is committed to Michigan and Donovan to Missouri, but there's rumors that we're still heavily involved in both and it could go all the way to signing day. And also Esun Tafa, a 2026 offensive lineman from Utah, absolutely massive player, is committing, I believe, next week. And there have been some good indications that UW may be um, leading the race for him. So those are three guys to keep your eye on. Any any preferences among that group or guys who are really interesting to you?
I think Marsh has been the big name, it feels like, especially around social media. And with him being committed to Michigan, I think it feels like it's very realistic to be able to flip him because obviously Michigan has had a setback from what they were able to do last season. But unlike Washington, the Huskies have passed the ball and they've done it effectively. They've had success through the air, and they just haven't won as many games as they would have liked. Well, Michigan, the pass game has been kind of it's been better in recent weeks, but for most of the season, it's been like really lackluster, and they don't really have the quarterbacks to distribute the ball. And obviously, that can change through the transfer portal. But how many transfers how many transfer quarterbacks are going to say, "Oh yeah, I want to go to Michigan and be the guy to run that offense," when it's an offense that isn't very friendly to quarterbacks. And so, I like those odds. I'd say him more than anyone else, but obviously Missouri, flipping a recruit from Missouri could be tough because one, Mizzou's in the SEC, and two, they've had guys like Luther Burden, who he's gonna go and he's gonna play in the NFL and he's gonna be great. And so it's tough to say, oh yeah, they don't want to pass the ball. They do want to pass the ball. They're just in the SEC, so they haven't been
Yeah.
as good as they wanted to be this year compared to last year. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I think if you're looking at a receiver that's committed and going to Michigan, you'll probably see schools all over the country trying to get that guy to flip because it feels like, why are you going to, to Michigan as a receiver?
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Yeah, Missouri, they're 7-3. They have two winnable games coming up. Like they've had it kind of feels like they've had an uneven year because they've laid a couple eggs in big games, but it's like playing at Texas A&M, at Alabama. Those are tough games. They're still a really, really good team. Uh, Shockingly, as you were talking, I was looking up Luther Burden's stats for the year. He's not leading the team in receptions, or I mean, in receiving yards. Theo Wees, the Oklahoma transfer, has about 60 more receiving yards than him, which is crazy because Burden is like one of the most impressive players in the country, just to watch him play. But yeah, I think Marsh, I guess from the tape, seems to be a little bit more of a game-breaking speedster, and Olugbode a little bit more of a outside true number one possession receiver. Actually, kind of reminds me of Odunze physically, but maybe it's just the initial. The Odunze and Olugbode names sound vaguely familiar, but either one of them, I would be absolutely thrilled to add to the recruiting class we have, and it would very much make up for the loss of the awful Vanderplug, who we never liked in the first place.
Nope.
So yeah, we got through. We have not lost power. Not that either of us were at risk of that. But before we wrap up, do you have any recommendations or plugs for this week? Did you see any more? You get to like a Olivia Rodrigo concert or anything this week?
No, but I hear her songs sometimes on TikTok, and so maybe she's someone else who I need to say, hey, she might be kind of good. Well, I know she's good, but she might be a good performer. For this week's plug, I'm going to go back to the world of television. My girlfriend and I have been watching Fire Country recently, and I started it last time we did this, but it was a little bit too early for me to give it a plug. I needed to see a little bit more. But now that we finished season one, I would say that that is a very good show. I'm enjoying it a lot. I think it's a um, Paramount show, a CBS show, and I'm not one to praise CBS after recent events this last year, but I like it a lot.
So you went from the Sabrina Carpenter last week, where the target market is, I don't know, 15-year-olds, to a CBS drama where the target market is 75-year-olds. So we've really spanned the gap. Uh, not being critical. They're both maybe very good. I have never seen it. I'm going to recommend a book called The Berlin Letters by Catherine Ray. It's a it's a spy novel set on two timelines about somebody working for the CIA in the present day, decoding messages, and then her dad in the, well, over time, from basically time the Berlin Wall was put up to spanning to, actually it's not present day, it's set in the late 80s as the wall is about to fall. But on the two timelines, and they eventually converge, and it's a very cool, like, starts out as kind of a procedural spy novel and becomes kind of a thriller at the end. And I just finished it last night, and it has a very happy ending. So maybe CBS could make a show out of that as well. I feel bad. It sounds mean that I'm criticizing these things, but I'm not. I just think they are targeted at very, very different audiences. Um,
I was
so,
surprised that I enjoyed Fire Country. Like I've heard it and I've seen commercials, mainly watching football games, and I'm always like, it looks like something I wouldn't really watch. But then I started watching it mainly because the main character is the brother from the show Bates Motel,
okay.
and so I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. But we've actually enjoyed it. It's a drama that doesn't feel unrealistically dramatic, if that makes sense.
The pictures, as I just looked it up online for like the promotional pictures, kind of look like they came from a Ford truck ad. It's like built Ford tough. But it may be very good. Maybe I should watch it. I do have Paramount. Let's wrap it up there. I think we've gone far enough off track. Enough detail on Fire Country for this week, but maybe we can get into it more next week, as in the bye week, which is to a Fire Country podcast. But we will be back at least to talk about the Oregon game and signing day not long after that. So in the meantime, thanks everybody for listening. We didn't have time for Cody Pickett this week, but still hoping to get him before the end of the season. And thanks to all of you who stuck with us through the bad weather, and go Dogs.
Go Dogs.